My credit score dropped 412 points on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact number because I was sitting at my desk at work when the alert came through on my phone. I opened it. The way you open something you expect to be routine. It was not routine. There was a mortgage in my name for $860,000, a property I had never seen, a loan I had never signed. I put my phone face down on my desk and sat very still for a moment. Then I picked it up again and read it a second time. The number had not changed. I need to tell you what I do for a living, because it matters. I am a forensic accountant, have been for 9 years. My job is to find things that people have tried to hide inside financial records, falsified entries, misappropriated funds, paper trails that loop back on themselves in ways designed to confuse anyone who isn't looking carefully enough. I am paid specifically to look carefully enough. I have testified in federal court twice. I have found fraud inside organizations that employed entire compliance departments whose only job was to make sure fraud didn't happen. I am not someone who misses things. I am not someone who is easily confused by numbers. The mortgage had been opened 14 months before I found it. 14 months. That is the part I keep returning to. Not the amount, though the amount was significant. Not the property, though. I will get to the property. It was the 14 months, an entire year and 2 months of a debt accumulating in my name, of a credit profile quietly degrading, of someone making monthly decisions, or as it turned out, not making them on a loan that carried my social security number and my signature, except that the signature was not mine. My name is Stella, I'm 33. I live in Atlanta in an apartment I have rented for 4 years and intend to buy when my lease is up. I have a clean credit history, or I did. I have never been late on a payment in my adult life, which is the kind of detail that sounds like a small thing until the moment someone uses your financial reputation as the foundation for their own scheme and you understand exactly what you had and what has been taken. I left work early that Tuesday. I told my supervisor I had a personal matter. I drove home, sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began pulling records. This is what I do when something doesn't make sense. I go to the documentation. I follow the line from the anomaly back to its origin, and I do not stop until I reach something solid. The property was a house in a suburb 20 minutes from my parents' home. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a renovated kitchen, and a backyard with a deck. The loan had been originated by a regional lender, processed through a broker, and had required, among other things, a copy of my driver's license, 2 years of tax returns showing my income, and a notarized signature on the closing documents. I had provided none of these things. Someone had. I sat with that for a long time before I allowed myself to follow the next line. The broker's name, the closing date, the address of the property. I opened a real estate database and I looked up the address and I looked at the listing photographs from when the house had sold. The photographs showed a kitchen I recognized, not because I had been inside it, because I had seen it in the background of a photograph my sister had posted online 4 months earlier, a photograph of her and her husband Deandra at a dinner party standing in front of a marble island with pendant lights above it, both of them smiling the wide, easy smile of people who are entirely comfortable in the space they are standing in. I closed my laptop. I sat in my kitchen and I thought about what I was going to do next, not reactively, not from the place of shock and anger that was present and real and which I acknowledged and then set to one side, because shock and anger are not useful instruments for the kind of work I needed to do. I thought about it the way I thought about every case that came across my desk. What do I know? What can I verify? What do I need before I move? What I knew was a mortgage, a property, a photograph. What I needed was confirmation. I drove to the address on a Wednesday evening after dark. I parked on the street and I looked at the house. Lights on inside. A car in the driveway. I recognized Deandre's black SUV, the one he had bought 8 months ago and mentioned offhandedly at a family dinner as a lease. String lights on the back deck visible from the street. The particular warmth of a house that has been lived in and settled into by people who intend to stay. I sat outside for 11 minutes. Then I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was watching television. I sat down at the same table where I had eaten every Sunday dinner of my childhood, and I told them what I had found. I showed them the credit alert. I showed them the address. I told them about the photograph. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the table. Then my mother said that I needed to be careful about making accusations I couldn't take back. I drove home that night and I did not sleep. Not because I was upset, though I was. Not because I was running through the numbers, though I was doing that too. I didn't sleep because I was sitting with a feeling I had experienced before many times in many smaller versions, and I was finally allowing myself to look at it directly instead of filing it away under a more manageable label. My mother's first instinct when presented with evidence of a significant crime committed against her daughter was to protect the person who had committed it. That was not a new instinct. I just had the clearest version of it I had ever seen. I grew up in a family with a specific and unspoken hierarchy. My sister Brittany was 3 years older than me, louder in every room, more easily distressed, and more consistently centered. Not because my parents were deliberately cruel. I want to be precise about this because precision matters to me in everything, including the way I describe my own life. They were not cruel people. They were people who had learned very early in Brittany's life that managing her distress was easier than tolerating it, and they had built a family structure around that principle so gradually and so thoroughly that they had stopped seeing it as a choice. I was the one who didn't require managing. That was how I understood my role from about the age of 10 onward. I was the daughter who handled things, who adapted, who found solutions rather than presenting problems. When I needed something, I found a way to need it quietly, to acquire it through my own effort, to arrive at outcomes without requiring anyone to reorganize themselves on my behalf. I was proud of that for a long time. I thought it was strength. I have a more complicated relationship with it now. The pattern started early. When I was 12, I saved my birthday money for 4 months to buy a particular book series I wanted. Brittany borrowed the books and returned them damaged. When I told my mother, she said Brittany hadn't meant to and that things were just things and I should be more generous. I was 12 years old and I had worked 4 months for those books, and I was being asked to absorb the loss and call it generosity. I absorbed it. I called it generosity. I moved on. When I was 17, I applied for a summer internship at a local accounting firm, my first real step toward the career I already knew I wanted. I was accepted. The internship required a professional reference from an adult outside the family. I asked my father, who was well regarded in his industry and whose name carried weight in our city. He said yes immediately. 2 days before the reference was due, Brittany had a personal crisis, a breakup, a bad week, the specific category of distress that reorganized the whole house around itself. My father became unavailable in the way. He became unavailable when Brittany needed him. The reference was late. I nearly lost the internship. I called the firm myself and explained, and they gave me a 1-day extension, and I found another reference from a family friend in 24 hours. My father apologized afterward. Briefly, he said he'd had a lot going on. I said I understood. At 24, I graduated at the top of my program. My parents attended the ceremony. Brittany did not come, having made plans she described as unmovable. The dinner afterward was at my parents' choice of restaurant, which was fine, and the conversation turned to Brittany within 20 minutes of sitting down, which was also fine, or at least familiar. My mother mentioned that Brittany was going through a transition period and needed a lot of support right now, and she hoped I understood. I said, of course. I was 24 years old and I had just graduated at the top of my program, and I said of course and meant it, because by then the adjustment was so practiced it required no effort at all. These things, individually, are the ordinary imperfections of family life. I know that. I have never needed my childhood to be a tragedy in order to understand it clearly. What it was a long education in a specific lesson that in this family my needs had a weight limit. That there was an invisible scale in every situation, and Brittany's side of it was always heavier by default. The mortgage was not a departure from that pattern. It was the pattern, fully matured. DeAndre had access to my documents because Brittany did. Brittany had access because I had trusted her with personal paperwork during a lease renewal 2 years earlier, when I had been traveling for work and needed a family member to receive and hold some mail. I had asked her because she was my sister, and I had never, in 33 years, needed a reason not to. That was my part in it. I own it. I've looked at it carefully, and I own exactly my portion of it and not 1 cent more. I called Brittany on a Thursday morning. I want to be clear that I did not call her in anger. I had spent 2 days building a file, pulling credit reports, requesting loan documents through the proper channels, printing the closing paperwork which I had obtained through a title company that processed records requests without requiring a lengthy explanation. I had the broker's name. I had the closing date. I had a notarized signature on a document that bore my name and was not my handwriting. I had looked at that signature for a long time. Whoever had replicated it had been careful. Not careful enough for a forensic accountant, but careful enough for a standard review. I called my sister with all of that in front of me on my kitchen table. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was normal, bright even. She asked how I was. I told her I was calling about the house. There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 seconds, but the particular quality of 2 seconds in which a person is deciding which version of a response to use. She said she didn't know what I meant. I read her the address. Another pause. She said that was her home, and she didn't appreciate the tone. I told her the home was mortgaged in my name. She said that was a misunderstanding, and that DeAndre handled all their finances and I should talk to him if I had questions. Then she said I had always had a problem with her happiness. She said it clearly and without hesitation, like it was something she had prepared. Like she had known this call was coming and had decided in advance to meet it with offense rather than explanation. I said I would be pursuing this through legal channels. I said it once, quietly, and then I ended the call. DeAndre called me 4 minutes later. His voice had a controlled, reasonable quality that I recognized from people I had encountered professionally. People who had done something they knew was wrong and had decided that the best defense was a calm, slightly patronizing manner that framed their accuser as the unstable party. He said there had been some administrative confusion during the mortgage process. He said my name had been used in error and that he had fully intended to correct it, and that I had gotten ahead of the situation by involving outside parties. He said the word error 3 times. He said confusion twice. He did not say sorry once. I told him what I had told Brittany, legal channels. Then I ended that call too. My mother called 20 minutes later. This call was different. My mother did not use the controlled, reasonable voice. She used the voice she had used my entire life when the family's equilibrium was being disturbed by something I was doing, a low, steady, slightly wounded tone that communicated disappointment without ever specifying its source, so that the disappointment seemed to exist as a general condition rather than a response to any particular action. She said she had spoken to Brittany. She said Brittany was extremely upset. She said DeAndre had explained the situation and it was more complicated than I was making it, and that families worked through these things privately and not through lawyers. I asked her if she understood that an $860,000 mortgage had been taken out in my name without my knowledge or consent. She said she understood that everyone was upset. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the file in front of me, and I felt something happen that I can only describe as a door finishing a motion. It had started a long time ago. Not slamming. Nothing so loud. Just the soft, complete sound of something finally closing. The part of me that had been waiting for my family to respond to this situation with fairness, that had driven to my parents' house on a Tuesday night and sat at that table and shown them the evidence, and beneath all of it, waited for someone to say, "This is wrong. We are sorry. What do you need?" That part finished waiting. It did not despair. It just stopped. I told my mother I loved her and that I would be in touch. I said it with complete sincerity because both things were true. Then I opened a new document on my laptop and I began building the formal case record. Not because I was angry. Because I was a forensic accountant and I had a significant financial crime in front of me, and I knew exactly how to proceed. The mortgage was the surface. I already suspected there was more beneath it. In my professional experience, there always is. I started with DeAndre's business filings. He had two registered companies that I had been vaguely aware of, a property consulting firm and a logistics LLC, both formed within the last 4 years. I requested their public records through the state business registry. The documents arrived in my inbox 48 hours later. I opened them and I leaned forward and I began to read. The two companies were shells. That was clear within the first hour. Registered addresses that traced back to mail forwarding services. Listed directors who, when I searched them, did not appear to exist in any verifiable form. Financial activity that moved in one direction without any corresponding business operations that would explain where the money was coming from or what legitimate service was being rendered in exchange for it. I had seen this architecture before in cases that had taken federal investigators years to untangle. I recognized the structure, the way you recognize a building you've been inside before, even when the facade has been repainted. I kept going. DeAndre's property consulting firm had issued invoices to 11 different entities over 3 years. I pulled every one. 6 of those entities were also shells, registered in different states, with overlapping director names that formed a rotation, the same small group of identities cycling through different company structures to create the appearance of independent transactions. 3 of the remaining entities were real businesses, small ones that I suspected had received services they hadn't requested and payments they hadn't authorized. And 2 of the entities were individuals. I ran the individuals through public records. Both had active fraud complaints filed with their state attorney general's offices. Both complaints referenced identity theft in connection with property transactions. Both had been filed in the last 18 months. My name was not yet in those complaints, but the methodology was identical. I sat with that for one evening, not to decide whether to act. That decision had already made itself the moment I pulled the first document. I sat with it to be certain of my sequence, my evidence, my presentation. I had learned in 9 years of forensic work that the difference between a case that holds and a case that collapses is almost never the facts. It's the organization of the facts. It is the ability to walk someone through a paper trail so clearly that the conclusion becomes unavoidable before you have stated it. I compiled everything into a single formatted report, 73 pages, indexed, cross-referenced, every document attached as a numbered exhibit. I had the mortgage, I had the shell companies, I had the overlapping director identities, I had the invoices, I had the 2 existing fraud complaints from other victims. I had a notarized signature on a closing document that was not mine and which I had sent to a handwriting analysis firm that had returned a written opinion within 5 business days. I sent the report to 3 places on a Monday morning. The FBI field office in Atlanta, the state attorney general's financial crimes division, and the regional lender who had originated the mortgage, specifically to their fraud and compliance department, with a formal written demand that the loan be flagged pending investigation and removed from my credit profile immediately. Then I went to work. I want to tell you what I did not do because it is as important as what I did. I did not call Brittany again. I did not call DeAndre. I did not send my parents the report or explain my next steps or give anyone in my family the opportunity to get ahead of what was coming. I did not post about it. I did not tell the story to anyone who did not need to know it for professional reasons. I simply filled the documentation with the appropriate authorities and returned to my life and waited for the process to move at its own pace. It moved faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks, I had confirmation from the lender that the mortgage had been flagged and a fraud investigation opened. Within 6 weeks, I received a formal acknowledgement from the Attorney General's office that my complaint had been received and assigned. The FBI took longer, as federal processes do, but I received an initial contact call at week 8 from an agent who had clearly read the report thoroughly and had questions that indicated the investigation had already extended well beyond what I had submitted. She asked if I was willing to cooperate fully. I told her that was the only way I knew how to do anything. My father called me in the second month. Not my mother, my father. He called on a Sunday evening and he did not open with pleasantries. He said he had heard from Brittany that there were legal proceedings. He said the situation had become serious. He said he was worried. I told him I was well. He said he meant he was worried about the family. I told him I understood that and that I hoped everything resolved in the way it needed to resolve, and that I was not in a position to discuss the details with anyone outside the process. He said he was sorry. He said it simply, without elaboration. I believed it was as close to the full truth as he was able to get to in a single phone call, and I accepted it in that spirit. My mother did not call. She sent a card 6 weeks later. A standard card, the kind sold in pharmacy aisles with a printed sentiment about thinking of you in difficult times. She had signed her name and added a single line in her own handwriting. I hope you know I love you. I read it twice. I put it on my counter. After a few days, I moved it to a drawer, not as a dismissal but as a placement, a thing I was not ready to discard and not yet ready to display. DeAndre was indicted 11 months after I filled the initial report. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, identity theft, mortgage fraud. The scheme had involved 9 stolen identities, 4 states, and approximately $4.2 million across a 6-year period. My case was one entry in a much larger document. I was not the first person he had done this to. I was the first one who had known exactly what she was looking at. Brittany was not charged. The investigation found no evidence that she had been an active participant in the broader scheme, though she had clearly known about my specific situation. What she had known and when and how much were questions that lived in a space I could not resolve from the outside and eventually chose to stop trying to resolve at all. She was my sister. What she had done was real and the damage was real, and I did not minimize either of those things. But the question of what she had known was hers to carry, and I had enough of my own weight to manage without adding hers. My credit score was fully restored 8 months after the mortgage was removed from my profile. My report came back clean. I applied for a pre-approval on an apartment I had been watching in my neighborhood and I was approved in 3 days. I stood in the empty October, light coming through the west-facing windows, dust in the air, the particular quiet of a space that hasn't been lived in yet and is waiting to find out what kind of life will fill it. I had worked for 9 years, developing a skill that let me find hidden things in complicated systems. I had spent 33 years in a family that had asked me in ways large and small to absorb what was redirected away from everyone else and keep going without complaint. Both of those things had led me to that room. The second one was not what anyone had intended to give me, but it had made me precise and patient and entirely unbothered by the discomfort of looking at something difficult until I understood it completely. Those were not small things. In the end, they were the most useful things I had. I signed the purchase agreement on a Wednesday morning. I used my own name.